a lot of people commented on the fact that the white violence at the Twin Peaks restaurant, conducted by biker gangs, and the deaths that followed were treated very differently in the media than incidents of violence or even peaceful protest in the black urban communities of the country. But our next guest had a very interesting take on why that might be and what might be driving some of the response to something like the Waco incident with the biker gangs versus reporting on inner cities. Aurin Squire returns to us. He's been on the show before. He is a freelance journalist. He is a playwright who is a playwriting fellow at the Juilliard School and has writing commissions and or residencies at the Dramatists Guild of America, Brooklyn Arts Exchange, and the National Black Theater. Aurin, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me again.
Oh, you bet. And I got a lot out of your piece on this whole topic. And what you said was the most dangerous uprising that's threatening America's stability isn't black protests in places like Ferguson or Baltimore. Okay, then what is it?
It is the aging, white, mostly male population that has this strange persecutorial complex, persecutorial paranoia, in which someone feels or they feel like they're being attacked, and therefore they have to defend themselves when all people are asking for is greater rights to live and exist. And the term is called white fragility. It was coined by a professor in North Carolina, Robin DiAngelo. I came across a academic paper she wrote last year on Facebook, and I was talking about it with a few friends, and I said, it'd be nice to interview her and Tim Wise. And then a few months later, I decided to just reach out and see where they were at, and we just had some great conversation. I recorded it, and then I wrote the article. I was talking yesterday with one of my friends who's a religious studies professor, and she was the one that added, in religious studies, that's known as persecutorial paranoia or anxiety, where people.
And Tim Rice, just to remind us, Tim Rice is the remind me. I think I know, but
Tim Rice is considered like the anti-racism expert in the country, and spends his time analyzing whiteness, because the problem with racism is that when everything is just judged from the other, then we assume whiteness is the standard. So Tim Wise, for years and years and maybe even decades, has been focusing on whiteness and how white privilege and other aspects of patriarchy and racism affects people in ways they are not even aware of. And Tim Wise and Robert DiAngelo are both white, middle-aged professors and academics. So they're the ones that actually have to speak to this, because a part of white fragility is an echo chamber where people don't even listen to any other side except for people who look like them who are white. And so in some ways they're doing God's work, because if this was said from a black person's perspective or Latino person's perspective, it would almost be dismissed and not even taken into consideration. And so white fragility is this aspect where we have a large population, the Fox News crowd, that feels like every single thing that's being done that is actually progressivism is an attack on them, even though it has nothing to do with them. So you could say gay marriage is an attack on straight marriage, when it really is just about gay people getting greater rights. Immigration, is an attack on their rights. So we send thousands of poor kids back to get killed in Central America by gangs.
Right. Or we intern them in horrible internment camp-like situations here in this country until they get sent back.
Yeah, in which many of them are killed. But we have to do that because these older white people feel like this is an attack on them more than the actual lives that are being killed by, gangs that are slaughtering kids. And this is what our policy is based off of. We deregulate and try to destroy unions because this is an attack on their rights, when in fact it harms them. And the thing about white fragility that's most devastating is not only does it benefit nobody, it harms everyone, including the people who hold that viewpoint. So you see a breakdown in regulations and rights for the everyday man because politicians and conservatives use this as a wedge issue. They use this persecutorial anxiety to cause division and rancor and anger among the population, and getting consistently, and this has been going on for decades, it's now just showing itself in the most extreme examples when it comes to seeing people get shot down and choked to death on video. But it's been around for decades after the Civil Rights Movement, where conservatives use this as a wedge against undereducated, poor, rural, middle, and working-class white people who usually don't have any friends of color or people of color in their lives, only talk to like-minded people, and feel like any sort of progress is an attack on them.
And so, Aurin Squire, when you wrote about this, one of the things you, sorry, I'm having a little audio problem here, but one of the things that struck me was when you said, this is the most dangerous uprising, racially based uprising in the country today, because what really made a huge impression on me was during this Clive and Bundy incident, where this rancher didn't want to pay his usage fees for public land and all, and Sean Hannity made him a hero, Fox News made him a hero, the right made him a hero, and he was on television night after night after night saying things that if an African American said them, if a Muslim said them, would get him killed, that the federal government has no legitimacy here. His followers were saying, we're there with guns and so on. I mean, this was militancy of a kind we haven't seen on the left in generations. And yet this was being, by so-called mainstream politicians and the so-called mainstream right-wing news network, this was being applauded as heroism. So one of the elements of this, I understand the concept of white fragility and that people are frightened to see their way of life as they understand it, that they're afraid that it's changing or going away or whatever. But we're talking about condoning and encouraging a level of anti-government radicalism that is really, in my mind, at the level of, the Weather Underground or somebody.
It's much worse because the Weather Underground never had a major news organization as its propaganda tool.
So I guess and I look at this issue of white fragility, which is an interesting concept. And by the way, I would like also to add, as a white person myself, that it's good that Robin DiAngelo and Tim Wise are doing this work, not just for the reason you mentioned, which is that these communities don't listen to quote unquote outsiders, but also because when a community, in this case the white middle-aged community, is doing bad things, it's the responsibility of other members of that community to step in. It's not the responsibility of the people they're attacking. So I'm glad they're stepping up. I appreciate them for that. But, I guess what I wanted to say and get your thoughts on was, I get the idea that, look, they're ignorant. They're these folks, they're being manipulated by politicians. As far as they can see, they like to think they feel safe in this kind of white world, and they see it threatened by immigration and even abortion, because then there won't be enough of them and so on. What gets me about this is, as I was saying before, the sort of condoning of violence and the way that turns into state violence. Any thoughts on how my community or the country at large can combat that?
Well, I asked Tim Wise that, and I asked Robin DiAngelo, because at the end of it, I said, give me some hope, because it was just every single thing I tossed out there was shot down. All the statistics are out there, and I asked Tim Wise, and he said, actually, facts don't play a role in this because it's non-fact based. It's completely based on emotion, and it's illogical. So, in fact, if you bring in facts like global warming, it just makes people more entrenched in their view, whatever that is, because the people who have this view is just an emotion-based fear reacting from some deep sense of not having self-worth. So he mentioned an example of one of the people who's a big anti-racist speaker around the country who used to be a skinhead. And so you can Google stuff and find out the discrimination that exists in this country against black and Latino people. That's out there on every single level. But this guy was a skinhead for years and years and became a leader of the skinhead movement in Michigan, I believe. And one day he was going into a McDonald's and he didn't have any money, or one night, he didn't have any money. The person behind the counter felt pity towards him and decided to give him a burger. The person behind the counter was a black woman. So she looked down and saw that this guy had a swastika on his on his shirt. And she said something to the effect of, don't you know you're better than that? And she just gave him the burger. She didn't argue with him. She didn't point out statistics. She didn't, read him a list of all the things that are wrong with what he was doing. She just posed a question that had to do with that individual person. And according to Tim Wise, this began him on that journey where he began exploring these concepts of black people are mean and evil, are going to attack me, and here's a black woman giving him a sandwich when he's hungry, and he slowly backed away from the skinheads. Then he became silent, and then he came out a few years later as anti-skinhead, anti-racist. So usually he said the thing that turns it around is anecdotal. It is not facts. It's not statistics. It's not logic. It has to be a one-on-one individual experience with other people of color, that they're not trying to kill them, they're not trying to attack them, they're not trying to take away their country. They're just trying to live and not get shot down by the police. They're trying to not get deported back to Central America so they can get killed by gangs. They're trying to have gay marriage so people can have rights to pass on property. They're trying to have rights over their reproductive systems as women so they don't have to travel to another country to get an abortion or get treatment. These are things that you and I understand, and most logical people would understand, but it has to be done on an anecdotal one-on-one level to actually break through this irrational fever that people have in this country.
You know, and talking to you about this, Aurin Squire, you know, part of the tragedy, it seems to me, is that the churches that these people attend could do so much in terms of, you know, bringing folks in from whether it's other faith communities, minority communities, gay communities, what have you. Instead, it seems like the churches are more often than not exacerbating the problem, right?
Yeah, Martin Luther King, I believe, called it the most segregated hour in America.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is Sunday, on the most segregated day, or whatever he said. It was Sunday, and that should be a time actually when you bring people together, and we head in the opposite direction. And that is the point where people's hearts are sort of open, or more open than they are during the week when they're working, when there's a possibility of, getting in there. Yet the vast majority of Christians, or people who identify themselves as Christians during the Civil Rights Movement as well as now, want no part in actually helping their fellow man get out of oppression or helping them get out of poverty. The vast majority of Christians are doing the opposite of everything that their religious doctrine preaches. And so I wonder if there are going to be religious leaders that are going to come out, and it can't be just black people. It has to be white religious leaders and pastors and reverends to get out there in the mega churches and speak to people beyond prosperity doctrines and how Jesus wants them to be rich, but also how Jesus wanted them to serve fellow man.
Amen. And I will add to this. I guess I would just close by asking you this. I know that in the piece you say you asked Robin DiAngelo and Tim Wise for hope and didn't get much hope, but are we just going to have to kind of run out the clock on these folks, or is there actual real possibility for change sooner than that?
I think there's possibility for change. I think we're reaching a point now where what's been known for years can no longer be denied. And it's on an anecdotal level through the videos and on one-on-one conversations with people. It's not going to change with generations. It has to change by actually breaking through that barrier. And over 20 years ago, Rodney King happened. And to black America, that was the first time when the cops were acquitted and found not guilty, that there was definitive proof that white America would rather believe their own prejudice than what's in front of their eyes and what they could see. Like, the prejudice is so strong and embedded, they can see someone get beaten nearly to death. They can see someone get choked to death. They can see someone get shot down in a Walmart, and they go, well, not guilty. He must have been doing something. And that was a revelatory moment in American history where it's like, oh, okay, we've been saying this for years, but there was always an excuse. Now you see it with your own eyes, and you'd rather believe your prejudice. I believe that, unfortunately, it's going to take a lot more Rodney Kings and Tamir Rice's and Beaver Creek Walmart shootings and Eric Garner, where people again and again have to see and have to confront the choice of choosing their own prejudice over what they're actually seeing, what the statistics say, what everyone's been saying for years. And I think that's how it changes.
Yeah, and hopefully at some point the leaders of these communities will step in, and religious and political and otherwise will have a change of heart and conscience and step in.
Only when
Well,
it's no
great
longer
piece.
profitable for politicians.
And I know
That
that,
can only be done profitable by people not voting these people in office. So the Macaca incident with George Allen in Virginia was a moment where an Indian person was insulted, and that turned the election. There are a few other moments that have happened in the last few years where blatant discrimination and racism doesn't pay. Now the question is, when are we going to start going after the subversive discrimination and racism that Fox News promotes through white fragility and white privilege, through Christianity being under attack, or all these different things that are
the war
making people live in fear?
Right. Absolutely. Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there, but great piece, and thank you so much for coming on the show, Aurin Squire, playwright and journalist.
Thank you very much for having me.
And we will be right back after this. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.